One of the great gifts of the spiritual path is not only our relationship with God and Guru, but the fact that we get to share that with others. And as I travel around the world into various places, I see these little groups, little families within the bigger family, not necessarily small in number, but just a group that's drawn together by its own interrelationship with each other, and over the period of time of chanting and serving and meditating and studying and striving, the bonds that are built are quite extraordinary. Those of us who were the first generation of Ananda, Vijay Keshava and I, who in this area were that group. Dhyana and Daya came a little bit later, but they were also there. But there was something that we all shared that Vijay is trying to put into words, in very kind words toward me, but it was really more the energy of the experience. It's very peculiar to be the age that I am now, because time doesn't really happen in the way that you imagine it's going to happen when you're the age that you are there. Let me just a second, I lost the thought, let me find it. Oh yes, I remember. Sri Yukteswar, in the Resurrection of Sri Yukteswar chapter of Autobiography of a Yogi, he appears before Master looking like an old man. And he explains to Master that he chose in the astral world to carry on the form of an elderly person. But almost everyone in the astral world has a body like in their mid to late 20s. That somehow there's little facts in the autobiography. You read it over and over, year after year. Every so often it just seems time. And then something completely different will strike you that you never noticed before, often some tiny point. Like, why would we all sort of think that the ideal body is our mid-20s? But that's how it's like we've grown up enough, we're on our own, we have our vitality, we have our ambitions, we have our dreams, and there's a certain power to that. And in a very real sense, I think we never actually really let go of it. From the age that I am, I'm still really puzzled when I look in the mirror. Just like, who is this person? As one of my friends said, I always think of myself as 30, no matter what I really am. But there's an astral reason for it. And in our lives, I was speaking of Vijay, myself, and some of us who were drawn onto the spiritual path at the time when it was really hardly there in the form that you see it now. It was Swami Kriyananda in a very singular way holding this extraordinary vision, and a bunch of others of us who incarnated really to do this work specifically, but not really knowing that. Growing up in America, there's no way you can think I incarnated to help a great master do his mission. Even to be a disciple is not a concept that comes to you easily. So there was a very unusual kind of magnetism happening. I often think of Swami Kriyananda also just in the course of his own life. As all of you know, he came to Master when he was 22 in 1948. He lived with Master for the last 3.5 years of Master's life. And then he remained within Self-Realization Fellowship, YSS, first in America, then in India, until the year 1962, which was 14 years after he met Master and was initiated, at which point the leadership of SRF decided that he was not a suitable member of their organization, and they sent him off. We celebrate that day as a great day. It was not a happy day in Swami's life. Of course, it was the founding point of what has become Ananda, so it was in the end our great good fortune. But at that point, at 22, he'd become a disciple and a monk. And for 14 years, he lived as a monk in a rather Western style, which is to say he was taken care of within the institution. He had a place to live, his expenses were met, It's not the wandering sadhu concept that you sometimes have in India. So he never held a job, he never had to think about practical matters in the sense that a family man would have to do. Then he was 36, he was dismissed from that work, he had essentially no money, he was forbidden to contact anyone who had been associated with that work. They were trying to erase him from their history. None of that is the point here. The point is he was entirely alone, and he had no money, and he had no friends, he had no prospects. He had one reality, which was he was a disciple of Master. He was a disciple of a great Master. And even more powerfully than that, when he was living with Master during those years, as Swamiji has often told us and written, Master often made it clear to him that he had a work to do. In fact, he called it a great work. You have a great work to do, he said. And even after Master died, Master's successor, Rajasi, said to Swamiji on many occasions, you have a great work to do. And then he added, and Master will give you the strength to do it. Now remember, Swamiji was 22, 23, 24. He was 25 years old when his guru died. So all of that was planted in him when he was, in physical terms, young. Of course, the soul has no age at all. In fact, there's a beautiful story that Swamiji tells. Well, I put the story together, but he told it in two parts. In the path, he describes how when he was born, as a little baby, as a young child, he said he was constantly astonished to find himself in this world. That's how he described it. To be incarnated in a material body, to sort of be living on this physical plane. And essentially what he describes is that much of him remained in the astral world. He said the astral world was much more real to him through his childhood. You know, we don't really always know what our dear little babies are doing. And he sort of was here, but his commitment wasn't here. And he said when he would go to sleep at night, I think from his earliest memories, when he would lie down in the dark, a point of light would appear, and he would gaze into that light, and as he gazed into it, it would expand, and then he would merge into this light. This is a little child. He would merge into that light, and that for him was sleep. And it was many years before he found out that that wasn't how everyone slept. I mean, how would he know? He would lie down and go to sleep. His mother would say, go to sleep. He'd go to sleep. This is what he would do. Of course, he was entering into a superconscious state that he brought with him. Then karma, he had much to exemplify and to live through. And about the age of 9, as he said, he repudiated those states of consciousness and tried to relate more to this world. I think he saw that he was here and he'd better deal with it. Things got tough then until he met his guru when he was 22. But then he said, after Master initiated him and he began to do Kriya, he found himself in exactly that same place, merging back into that light, entering a state of superconsciousness. Swami rarely talked about his experiences. This story is on one talk that he gave, and even listening to him, he sort of started this story and then kind of saw where he was going and he had to finish. I think he would not have finished if he had been able to see a way out. But what he described was fascinating. He said when he went back into that place of superconsciousness, he said it was exactly the same as when he'd been a child, and it was exactly the same moment as when he had been a child. Because in superconsciousness there is no time. No time passes. It's the eternal now. It's the center of the circle of the spectrum of past, present, and future, which is arranged like a wheel on the outside with the eternal now in the center. And when you're in the eternal now, past, present, and future are all equidistant from where you're standing. And from this point, everything happens. So he went in as a child, he wandered a little bit in the confusion of finding your way, and then he walked back right into that state. So this was the consciousness that he brought to that isolated moment. But when a great soul, even a free soul, enters human life, they embrace it completely. It's a very interesting point. We were discussing this in a group last night. Swamiji once asked Master, when Master was talking about previous incarnations, having been Arjuna and having been William the Conqueror, the great English king and warrior who went from France and really established what became England, which eventually came over here and caused you guys so much trouble. But nonetheless, all of that was set in motion by the masters. And Swamiji, he was challenged Swamiji's neat picture of what an avatar was, to think of him being a king and a warrior and playing such an important political and historical role. It just didn't fit. I know there's the book, 2 Souls, 4 Lives, and if you haven't read it yet, it's not only just a really great story, and it is a really great story about Yogananda being William the Conqueror, Kriyananda being William's son Henry. It's also, it enormously expands our spiritual understanding about the role of the masters and how God really works in this world. It makes us all much bigger in our understanding of these things. So Swamiji asked Master, he said, when you incarnate, you meaning a self-realized Master, do you remember at all times? And Master's answer was very subtle. He said, inwardly, you are always free. Of course, that implies that you're really participating in this world, and that's certainly what you see, because it would be no example to the rest of us if the Master or the free soul were just walking through unaffected, because then we would only be able to say, well, he can do it, because he's different than me. Like the disciple that Swami tells us about, who said, upon whom Master was urging some difficult task, and the disciple really did not want to do it. And so finally the disciple thought he had the winning argument, and he said to Master, well, it's easy for you to do, you're a master. I mean, imagine what is in the mind of a disciple when he says that. But in the moment, I guess it seemed like a good idea. But it allowed Master to respond, and what do you think made me a master? He said it was by doing, by having the power to face it. So the struggles that we see, that we witness Swami go through, many, many, and that we know some of what Master went through. Swami Kriyananda's biography of Yogananda does a great service to our understanding, not merely of Yoganandaji, but of the whole spiritual path. Because we see how many conflicts and betrayals and disappointments and repeated efforts it took for Master to accomplish his mission. He just didn't just sail in and walk on water and have it done. Too much of Master's actual history is not known, and in time I hope it will be, because it greatly expands our understanding of the spiritual path. Because we are here to become masters, to become free souls, and when Master says, what do you think made me a master? We need to understand what did make him a master. How did he live? How did he face life? So we see in Swami, so what I was saying by this is that, and Master explains this in many places, that they fully participate in the experience of the world. They become interwoven with the events and the circumstances and everything that we all struggle with, getting along with people. Now, they don't struggle in themselves with the same kind of desires and conflicts, perhaps, but nonetheless, they're in circumstances where they must rely on other people, where they have to win friendship, where they have to win support, where people's karma causes confusion, and in fact, we think a master's life would be perfectly harmonious, but it's really just the opposite. I read some person was trying to explain evil in this world. And this was a simplistic explanation, but actually I rather like it. It said basically that at any point in time, depending on the consciousness of the planet, which is to say where it is in the Yuga cycle, that there can only be so much light. There has to be a balance of light and darkness, whatever that divinely dictated moment is. And whenever there gets to be too much light, then darkness has to come up and try to restore whatever the proper equilibrium is. Sri Yukteswar has assured us that we are in an ascending Yuga cycle. I understand that is not the commonly accepted view, but I say we go with Sri Yukteswar on this one. Besides, whatever it is what it is. But to think in terms of this being an ascending cycle gives more power and purpose to the work we're doing, and it becomes less pointless. Because if we are planting seeds for an age of increasing enlightenment, the chances of those seeds sprouting and growing are obviously greater. I know nothing about the yugas except what Sri Yukteswar tells us, so I have no reason to doubt his point of view. That's a whole separate discussion. But let me just a moment. Let me find my thought. So I know what I was remembering. When I was writing the book about Swami Kriyananda, Swami Kriyananda as we have known him, that was a project that I knew that I had to do from a very young age. I came to Swamiji as it happened. I also met him when I was 22. It was about a year later before I actually gave up the life that I had and moved into the ashram. It took a little while for me to organize all the forces in my life to make that happen. And almost from the very beginning, I had the opportunity, as Vijay mentioned, to work closely with Swamiji. I soon became his secretary and often met with him on a daily basis and traveled with him sometimes, lots of opportunities. Almost from the start, I knew that what I would use the word privileged to experience, to understand, to see this man at very close quarters, and to be involved in the bare roots of building what is now why we're sitting here, which is Ananda Sangha, which is now worldwide, which was then a country location more primitive than the Pune community, which is greatly reassuring if you are a little dismayed by the state of the Pune community when you go down there. I look at it and it's so exciting to me because I know where it can go from there. I know the tremendous hard work that's required, which also I think is just really exciting, that all of this can happen. But from the beginning when I was there with Swamiji, and I have a visual memory of many things, and he lived at that time in this little dome on the edge of the forest. It's still there at the meditation retreat, for those of you who ever go to America and see it. And there was a little porch, and he would have these satsangs. Well, they were hardly satsangs because there were so few of us, but on Sunday afternoons he would invite a few people over. It was 4, 5, 6 people, very, very small group of people he felt he could really work with and inspire and would be the seed. And he would talk sometimes, not often, but sometimes he would talk about the future of what we were doing. I vividly remember about 1971, when we were absolutely impoverished, with no particular prospects. We were living in tiny huts and trailers and teepees we made out of canvas. We had no electricity. We had water, but no running water, no indoor plumbing, just very simple. I loved it. I moved from an apartment in San Francisco into a tent, and it took me about 12 hours to forget that I'd ever lived anywhere else. You know, real happiness is inside. And when you have that, everything else is quite incidental. Of course, we supported each other. It wasn't like one person wandering off to make that happen. And Swamiji was there. I mean, I could have lived in an igloo in Antarctica with him. It wouldn't have made any difference. I was at the center of the universe. One day I remember him saying, first we'll develop in America, He said, first on the West Coast, then we'll go to the East Coast of America. From America, we'll go to Europe. From Europe, we'll go to Australia. From Australia, we'll go to India. And then he said, India would like to be part of an international movement, not merely an invasion of Americans, is how he put it then. And he said, and that's how it'll work. We actually have not really developed the East Coast as much as we should have. We tried Australia, and after a while, it just, as Swamiji said, it was too early. Australia wasn't ready. I'm hoping actually to go back now. But we are here in India. But we were just sitting there, and I was like, sure, Swamiji, if you say so. And then, I mean, if he had said we were going to go colonize Mars, I would have said, sure, why not? If you say we can do it, of course we can do it. But all of that, but what I was starting to say about that was, I really felt that I was witness to something that I needed to chronicle, and that I would be called upon at some point in my life, which turned out to be quite a few years later, to make a chronicle of that. And I've done that one book, and when I go home, I'm going to really start writing a much bigger book. I'm ready to write a real story now. It's going to be called Dharma Equals Victory, the story of Swami Kriyananda and the founding of Ananda. And I'm just beginning to pull the notes together, but there's so much that happened. And Swamiji was so conscious in the way he developed the energy, and careful and inspired in so many ways, and much of it is lost. Nobody really knows. Plus, he did dozens of creative initiatives. He started so many movements that never got finished, that are lifetimes of work for other devotees, and it would be nice to sort of have those there so that others can find them. But let me think. I had a point now where I was going. Let me see if I can find it. What I watched him do, and this is a guideline for all of us, both in our personal life and also in our service of Master, was that he always held in his heart the vibration of attunement with the Guru. And as long as he was holding that vibration, he could always tell what the right direction was for us. And he often said that he didn't really care that much about the details of what was being done, because he knew if the spirit was right, then the details would take care of themselves. So he was a very interesting leader in that respect. He actually talked about Master in the same way. Swamiji, of course, in his life simply replicated what he learned from his Guru and replicated the spirit of Master in everything. He said when Master was alive, people would often say that he was not a very good organizer, that Mount Washington and the places that he lived didn't run in a very systematic way. Now we could argue he was more Indian than American, but it was nonetheless, that was the point of view. Swamiji came in 1948, and Master gave him the job of organizing the monks. And of course, Master arrived in America in 1920 and started Mount Washington in 1925. But when Swami arrived in 1948, it was the first time any effort was made to organize the monks there. I mean, you would have think that he would have sort of set it up a long time ago. And when Swamiji was writing, I think he was writing a book about leadership. And this is how even a disciple grows in their understanding. It was very touching. He said he'd always sort of bought into the idea, so to speak, that Master was, quote, not a good organizer, that wasn't his talent, because that was the way people expressed negativity when they were in the ashram there with him. Astonishing that people would express negativity. But we tend to want God to match our concept of him. That's one of our problems, is that we expect him to meet our criteria instead of ourselves trying to meet his. Well, Swamiji, when he was meditating more deeply on the way Master ran Mount Washington, he realized that Master had Mount Washington perfectly organized, but he organized it on the principle of magnetism. which is that Master himself had a tremendous magnetic aura, and he had his ray, out to everyone who was in tune with him, who was there. And through that magnetic power, he was holding the pattern always where it needed to be. Now, a lesser person makes rules. You shall be here at this time, you shall be there at that time, this is how you shall conduct yourself, this is what you'll wear, this is where you'll sit. And people think of that as well, now something is organized because it has all this form. But the great difficulty, of course, when you have all that form, is often then people don't have to have the right consciousness. And they don't even necessarily know whether they have the right consciousness, because if they're matching the form, you can't even tell. You look right. This is how Swami describes people imagine that spirituality is something that you assume from the outside. Now many of us who have taken certain initiations wear blue, and we have the title of Nayaswami, or there were brahmacharis wearing yellow, or tyagis and so on. But for most of the years of Ananda, we had no structure at all, nothing like that. And I think Swami only gave it to us when he felt we were mature enough not to hide behind it, but to really understand that the only way we'll ever be devotees of God is to be devotees of God, not to look like one. It just doesn't do you any good, because God doesn't have physical eyes and he's not fooled. There was a preacher in America, that unique quality of evangelical Christianity, which I know you all must know about, where you pledge your life to Christ and you're saved for all eternity. There is, of course, a kernel of divine truth in that, but it's not always carried out in exactly the right way. And there was a very famous evangelist in America named Billy Sunday. He must have assumed that name, but anyway, that was his name, Billy Sunday. So Master used to love to tell the joke about Billy Sunday dying and going to heaven and being at the gates of heaven, and St. Peter was there. And St. Peter's just looking through the rolls of the people who are allowed in heaven, and he just doesn't see Billy Sunday's name there. And he says, "I'm sorry, your name is just not here. How could my name not be there?" The preacher said, "I sent thousands of people to you." Well, St. Peter said, "You may have sent them, but they didn't arrive." That's how he put it. And Master would tell that joke with a great deal of pleasure. And he liked to tell it because he was really trying to say to people, it's not really what's happening on the outside. And so even when Master was living, he didn't bother. He didn't bother because it was a lesser reality to have it all look right. He did the entire thing by magnetism. Everyone rotated around their relationship with him. And because of that vibration, it was obvious when you were moving and doing or not doing the right thing for those who were in tune. And then the challenge of it all just comes right back onto the devotee. In America, Master called his work self-realization. And part of the mission here on both sides, East and West, in the West, it's to break the institutional structure of the church. I'd break it in the sense of break people out of it, free people from it. He wasn't attacking it and trying to destroy it. He was trying to free people of that. And in the East, I think it's to restore the essential reality of self-realization, and to take it away from mere ritual and the idea that a priest is required for your self-realization, that your relationship with God is somehow enhanced by somebody else doing something for you. Because, as Master said, the only place God can be realized is the central nervous system, which I always find such a jarring finish to that sentence. The only place God can be realized, and you're expecting some beautiful poetic phrase, and he says, the central nervous system. And every time I hear it, I kind of
go like that, but that's what he was trying to get us to understand, which is the temple is the spiritual eye. The temple is awakening the chakras. The temple is the Kriya, breath flowing through us. And responsibility for our spiritual life, your spiritual life and mine, is right in the palm of our own hand, which is nothing keeps us separate from God except our decision to be separate. And everything is possible in terms of our attunement to God and Guru. If we choose to simply stand in that emanating ray. I love these huge pictures of Master, and when I go to the Gurgaon ashram, they have one of that size of Swamiji. If you walk down into their downstairs room, it's as big as the wall. Of course, I mean, it's just a way of trying to communicate spiritual consciousness. It really is just a large picture. Otherwise, we have in our temple in Palo Alto, we have a circle of the spiritual eye, except the way we made it, because our temple is very large, the spiritual eye is bigger than the masters on the altar, because the spiritual eye is bigger than the masters on the altar. And there was some questioning as to how we should make it and what we should do. And so when we had, I actually made one out of a huge piece of cardboard and Christmas wrap, just so we could see what it would look like. And when Swami came in and saw that, I said, "What do you think, sir?" He said, "The spiritual eye should look big enough to walk right into it," which I love that. And we made it as big as the architecture allowed. I would have had it big enough to walk right into. Somehow when we see the Master's eyes, the face, it looks big enough to walk right into. And that's exactly what we really want to be feeling. It's not the physical, of course, that's the issue. But that physical is the window for that attunement. And it's interesting, Swamiji tells us that Master, in public, Swamiji said, he talked about many, many things. But in private to the disciples, he talked only about attunement. And he didn't even, he must have, but he didn't even emphasize Kriya meditation, because attunement was the foundation of a disciple's life. And then Kriya meditation follows from that. But even Kriya without the corresponding attunement. And that attunement is such a fascinating and interesting reality. And going back to Swamiji and those early years with him, it's hard for you all to appreciate, both because the American culture is so different in regard to spiritual people. Well, at that time, so different, like it wasn't there, like there was a zero. And Swami himself made a very conscious decision that he did not want the people who came to help build Ananda to receive their understanding from the outside in. And at that time in America, there was a big spiritual scene. It was a time when a lot of gurus were coming, or so-called gurus coming from India, and a lot of Americans were what I would call playing out a fantasy of having a guru and living in an ashram. And unfortunately, a lot of the gurus played right along with that. So there was a lot of, fakey stuff going on. Just a lot of hoo-ha, where nobody really knew what they were doing. It was not attractive to some of us, but it was a kind of a carnival atmosphere. So Swami could easily have stepped into that. Swami Kriyananda, he was a notable figure. He had a lot of charisma. He represented a great master. He could have made himself very important. In fact, I traveled to New York with him, and we met a woman there, an American woman, as it happened, who actually had a lot of spiritual presence. She was the genuine article to the extent that she was. But she was very popular for that time. And we went to this event, and there were like 800 people there, which was a lot. Many, 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 many more than had ever come to anything Swami Kriyananda had done anywhere. And there was a lot of adoration around her. And I jokingly said to Swamiji afterwards, "Sir, if you would just declare yourself God realized, preferably claiming some notable previous incarnations, and dress yourself a little more fancy. These ordinary Western clothes are just so dull. And if you let us carry a white umbrella around behind you," I said, "we could really be a hit here in America." Of course, I was joking, but it was like, make it look right on the outside and people will feel comfortable with that and they'll believe that something is happening. I was teasing, but he answered me really seriously. I wrote this in the book. We were in a taxi cab in New York City. And he said, "I've always felt I could accomplish much more by being a simple, unaffected friend to people than in any other way." And if you were really going to define what Swami Kriyananda was like, that's what he was. He was a real friend to people. I've been so impressed by how many people felt that about him. And almost to the end of his life, he conducted his own correspondence. We tried to keep his email secret, but he was always giving it out. We didn't try to keep it secret, but we tried to keep him from being deluged, but it was always suddenly in the hands of everyone. And then he would check his own emails and you'd find a message from him. It was very easy, even to the end, to be in direct communication with him. He was a simple, unaffected friend. And in another context, once when people were trying to elevate him in a way that he didn't appreciate, to be the sixth master on the altar, he spoke very strongly against it for many reasons, not the least of which is that Master said that he was the last in the line, and so that's what that means. That doesn't mean no one else will ever be self-realized or have disciples, but there won't be one more picture on the altar. We sneak him in like this now. But the point he said was really simple. He said, what is needed now is not one more person claiming to be a guru, but an example of what it means to be a disciple. And I really felt that was the lila in a divine sense that Swami played, because he behaved for many of us. If you say that he was Master's instrument or he was a guru in his own right, it doesn't really make any difference. He was the channel through which the divine flowed, and through him I'll speak for myself, but many of us understand how to live spiritually. But what he taught us is exactly what he wanted to teach us, which is how to be a disciple, which is how to feel not that I am this powerful force, but that I am an instrument of this higher power. And Swamiji accomplished so much in his life. It's just stunning how much he accomplished. And after I finish this book, you'll hear about even more of it that that had less tangible form, or was more an initiative rather than a complete movement. And he would often, just like a little child, he would often tell us about all the things that he had done. Well, in the last 6 months, and then he would say to Lakshman, her secretary, "Do you have the list?" And he'd get the list, and then he'd read. And then I wrote this book, and then I recorded these songs, and then I had to do this album, and then of course I had to go and I had to give these 16 lectures, and then I had 2 days in which to finish this, so I finished this. Is that everything? Can you think of anything else? And people who didn't understand just wondered, what was he doing? But Vijay mentioned the opportunity to be in proximity to that energy, and I never found it difficult, except sometimes when I didn't get enough sleep. Just his energy was so high. He was twice my age at that point and 15 times the energy. And he described once, sometimes he saw a desperate fatigue in my eyes, is how he put it, just desperate to be able to get some rest. But what was so much fun working with him, and even now is true in everything you hear or read, and the same with Master. At the beginning, sometimes I posited my own preconceptions of what the spiritual path was, or my own prejudices. Just who knows where ideas come from, but you have an idea and you're just persuaded that you're right. And I would sometimes posit my own opinions against his. And he was really quite patient and quite careful to both guide me and not squelch me, which I really appreciated in retrospect when I realized how skillfully he was doing that. But there reached a point where I began to think, instead of looking at what he does and evaluating it according to what I already know, if he contradicts my ideas, let me try to understand what it looks like from his point of view. And over the years, I began to realize that prodigious flow of creative energy, because always he would then say, all you have to do when you really want to create something or understand, just put your consciousness at the spiritual eye and pray to Master and hold clearly the vision of what you want. And then he would just tell us, and then of course, just do it like that. And so we'd all try with varying degrees of success, not finding it as effortless as he found it. When I was struggling to write once, and I was talking to him on the phone, he sort of thought for a moment. He said, I've never had writer's block. He said, I've never hesitated when I had to write something. I just wrote it. I just said, wow, you're very fortunate. And then he would explain, because I would just attune myself to Master, and Master would have it flow through me. So all of that, recitation, he wasn't reciting what Kriyananda had done. He was showing what a disciple can do. What is needed now is an example of discipleship. And of course, there was only one of him. Master hasn't been knocking on all of our doors telling us we have a great work to do. We are part of a great work in the sense of greatly beneficial to those who are seeking it. We don't have to puff ourselves up. It doesn't serve us to puff ourselves up. But the power of everything we're doing is that power of attunement. And what Swamiji exemplified all those years, and it was interesting because, as most of you know, we had a period of intense conflict when Self-Realization Fellowship in America decided that it was time to reassert their unique authority. In America, where churches are founded on a regular basis, our Italian friends find that so incomprehensible, because in Italy there is the church, and they can't understand how you can found a church. It just makes them kind of crazy. But in America you can do that, and Master did that. He incorporated legally as a church. That was the way you do it in the U.S. And so there's a history that some person of either infinite stature as Yogananda or less stature, who has a good idea, starts a religious institution, and they have it all to themselves for a while. And then, if they're at all successful, it begins to spread. And then there is the second one. And the second one is always the big problem. The third, fourth, and fifth one are not such a problem, but the second one is always a problem, because the mere existence of the second one breaks the monopoly. And all of a sudden there's another point of view. So we had to play that drama out. And we played that drama out for a while now. I had a reason for bringing this up, and I will try to remember what it was. Let me just see if I can find it. Give me a moment here. I can't recall. So I'm just going to wander off from that and see if I can think about what it was. Why did I say that? That when we were faced with that difficult... Oh yes, this was what it was. There was an attempt to discredit what we were doing. It was a theological dispute. It was a difference of opinion as to whether or not every disciple can represent his guru, or only certain disciples can represent their guru. That's a very serious theological dispute. But there's no American law about that. There's no guru-disciple succession code of conduct, that the Supreme Court has decided. So it had to play itself out in a truly ridiculous manner. Painful and expensive, but in the end ridiculous. Now, once again, the thought slipped away, but we will find it. Just a minute. So whether or not another guru. Oh, yes. But in an attempt to discredit Swami Kriyananda, they talked about what a dictator he was and how he was always, he ruled with an iron fist and all of these things. It was just pure slander, because that's what people do. When they want to win, they do things that aren't honorable. But it was so ironic, really ironic in the extreme, because when we sat back and thought about it, we realized that Swami Kriyananda had, as far as he actually gave 2 examples in his life in which he had ever told anyone what to do. And in both cases, really serious moral issues were involved, and he took a stand to someone and said, you must do the honorable thing here. But otherwise, and it was really amazing to contemplate. He's 36 years old, he has no friends, he has no money, he's all by himself, and he has to build this. And he built it without ever telling anyone what to do. He built it by the sheer power of his magnetism, of his enthusiasm, of his commitment to do Master's work, of his love for Master, and from his attunement. And what that creates for those who are sensitive to it. Last night someone asked me about, what about the people who just never get on the spiritual path? What happens to them? And I said, this is what happens to them, meaning they live this life. They live the life we see around us, and they just go on and on doing it. I was speaking of my mother before she died, and someone told me there's a popular acronym, which is FOMO, FOMO. FOMO means fear of missing out. And it's something that young people use to talk about the fact that they don't want to go to sleep, they don't want to leave the party, because they have a fear of missing out on something. And I realized that was my mother's attitude at the end of her life. She was a dear woman, bless her, and after she died, I had a couple of dreams about her, so I think she's done just fine. But that was her attitude toward death. Who will be the next American president? I have this fear of missing out. All this is going to be going on. I'm not going to be part of it anymore. From my point of view, what an incredible thing to say. Why would that even cross your mind? But I didn't say that because it wasn't appropriate. I just said, oh, wow. Well, maybe it'll work out and it'll be okay. I really couldn't say anything. She didn't have any context. But for some of us who have been through that cycle enough, who knows why? Who knows why the spark of the divine ignites in the mind of some and not in the mind of others? It's just a mystery. I think even the masters can't solve it. Someone asked Master if he could tell where people were at spiritually. He answered instantaneously, just in an instant. Of course, I don't think he saw us. We look at each other's faces and the glasses and the sweaters that we're wearing. I think he just saw vibrations of consciousness. A woman friend of mine, this is actually in my book about Swamiji, she was in a satsang with him one night, and it was a very deep satsang, and she felt this energy, and then somehow her consciousness really shifted, and suddenly she was as if she were inside of Swami's consciousness, looking out at the room. And she said she saw it as he saw it. And she realized that she wasn't looking at bodies and faces, she was looking at vibrations of light. And Swamiji we had this experience of him. I was commenting about how this woman wasn't certain of the color of her husband's eyes, which just seemed really an odd thing to me. And at the dinner table conversation with Swamiji, I happened to mention that so-and-so, we were buying him a birthday present, and I said, this shirt would look nice on him, it's the color of his eyes. And she actually said to me, is it? And it was the color of his eyes. How could she not know? And I said it just like that, with this kind of excitement. And Swamiji let the conversation go, and then after a moment he said, I don't know what color people's eyes are. And then he referred to Seva, with whom he had worked closely every day for like 15 years. He said, and he looked over at her, and you saw him sort of alter his face, his perception. He looked at her. She has these huge brown eyes, beautiful big brown eyes. He looked sort of like this. Oh, he said, they're brown. It's like, this is something very different is going on here. And then he said, I never look at people's eyes, I look into them. Because the eyes are the window to the soul. And he also said, when I meet someone after a separation, and I knew he meant incarnational as well as months or years, he said, sometimes I don't recognize them, but when I look into their eyes, then, as he put it, they come into focus. And you'll see him, I watched him after he said this sometimes. He'll be in a group, maybe he's in a new city or a new country or just back in a place he hasn't been in a while. And you'll see him kind of talk for a while, and then someone will come into focus, and then he'll suddenly, start over. Oh, now I know who I'm with. I feel who I'm with. I know what's happening here. But what Swamiji was manifesting, as I was saying with Ananda, was he had so much enthusiasm. And I've often thought about the fact, because of course the history of Christianity is something we know in our country, and everybody knows it a little. There were 12 disciples. One of them betrayed Jesus, so they got down to 11. They filled in the spot after Judas was gone, but there were 12 of them. Jesus was executed like a criminal. They were not popular folk. They were in physical danger for themselves. Eventually their own community, which was the Jewish community, repudiated and turned their back on them because they were a sect of Judaism and they couldn't make any headway. People were more determined in the traditional sect than in this new sect. The irony of Christianity is that it was always Judaism until the Jews rejected it, and then it became something else. Then there was the disciple Paul, who never met Jesus. Jesus died before Paul became interested. In fact, Paul's role was to hunt out those who were following Jesus and to persecute them, because this was the effort to get rid of this sect that was undermining, they felt. Paul had a vision of Jesus, so he communed with him. He had through a vision. Then he dedicated his life to spreading what he called the good news. And the good news was the same good news that Swamiji dedicated his life to, which is you can be free of suffering and you can live a life of bliss. And this is how you do it. And this great soul offers you attunement with his consciousness. They called it lots of other things. But it was exactly the same teaching. Jesus was a self-realized master, and by attuning yourself with his vibrations and following his teachings, then you can also live in that same reality. And that was awfully good news when you think about it, because those folks, just like the folks here and the folks all around the world, are just on this treadmill of going to work and coming home and cooking food and having babies and raising the babies and having them grow up and having them get married. Then they have babies, and then pretty soon it's over, and then pretty soon you incarnate again, and then you're a baby, and then just like in Autobiography of a Yogi, Master coins the phrase anguishing monotony, which is just, in terms of wordsmith, is perfect. That's what describes it. Even tragedy kind of keeps you engaged. You're busy. But it's the real anguishing monotony of it that really pulls us to something else. Because we know inside our hearts that we were made for bliss. And that's such a deep-seated longing within us. And we have such a deep-seated conviction, whether we know it or not, that that is our true destiny. Because if we didn't know that, it wouldn't occur to us that what was happening wasn't just what it was supposed to be. You see what I mean? you don't just try to make your hand have 6 fingers, because it doesn't. So you don't worry about it only having 5. 5 is just what it has. But when we're suffering, we know that something is wrong. And so in the story of Christianity, Paul was so convinced that what he was offering was true and was for everyone. And when the Jews closed the doors of the synagogues against him, he just went out and found what they would call Gentiles. And that's how Christianity became separate. Swami Kriyananda went to Master. He read Autobiography of a Yogi at a time when what he was doing was so radical. As he describes it, his parents thought it was a lunatic decision that he'd taken. In Miracles and Answered Prayers, the Loved and Protected, the book, there's a story by Swami Kriyananda about how, and he told us this many times, it's very poignant, how Master took his parents to Egypt in 1948 when you had to go on a steamer. So you couldn't just fly. There was no cell phones. There was no email. His father was already in Egypt. His mother was crossing the ocean on this ship. And then that's when Master grabbed Swamiji. That's when Swami found Master and Master found Swami. The very day his mother got on that ship, he bought Autobiography of a Yogi. And 5 days later, he'd left everything behind and was living in Los Angeles as a disciple. And his parents were just completely out of the picture. Swami said it was 2 years before he saw them again, by which point there was nothing they could do about it. God is watching out for us in one way or another. And when that vibration is right, he calls. And Swamiji, his life is very similar to St. Paul's. People have tried to say, you must have been St. Paul. Swami's answer is so amusing. He said, I've never really liked St. Paul, who wrote a lot of letters and has a certain personality. He said, I don't like his personality very much. I admire his work. His other answer was, I would like to think he's not still just doing the same thing. I would like to think that he was finished. But in any case, Swami had the same conviction, which is he met Yogananda. He realized the power of attunement. Yes, Kriya, yes, teaching, everything. But as St. John says in the Bible, to all who received him, he's speaking of Christ, to all who received the vibrations of Christ, Christ was able to give them the power to become a Christ. And Master often quoted that, to all who receive, meaning receiving his consciousness. So Swamiji sat in front of this soul in the body and felt that extraordinary potential. And Master initiated him. And from that point, Swami never, 60 years, he never looked back. Never for a moment hesitated. This is my life. I know the power of this, and I will do everything I can to make everyone as happy as I am. And that's what the marvelous power, the entire power of the whole path of self-realization is that you feel so fizzed over with joy that you just can't stand it, and you've got to go tell somebody about it. Or even if you don't have the destiny to be putting it into words, you're just walking around radiating that magnetism. Speaking of my dear mother, who accepted what I was doing but never seriously understood it. It just wasn't her karma to understand it. Toward the very end of her life, and she sort of kind of said this off, looking away from me a little bit, I don't know, I just like being around you, she said. Then she stared off like this. Maybe it has something to do with what you're doing. Just like that. Which I thought was enough. That was all her soul could do at that point. But she noticed. She noticed that when we're in tune with the Master comes through us. And Swamiji built all of Ananda without ever telling anybody what to do. And until he came to India, he never was really acclaimed in the way he began to be acclaimed on this side, because first in Italy and then in India, there's a greater tradition of recognizing spirituality embodied like that. In America, we're so egalitarian. Plus, Swami, I have to just simply say, Swami kept a veil. And you had to be very sensitive to know what you had. But he built Ananda by the magnetism of his enthusiasm and his joy. And he just inspired us. He didn't have to tell us what to do. We just wanted to do it because it was really the most fun game in town. That was all that there was. And the more we went along with his ideas and the more we committed ourselves and listened to his advice and studied and learned and meditated and began to catch that vibration ourselves, Ananda just began to swell. You know, it wasn't built. It just began to swell. The bubble of joy just got bigger and bigger. And as it began to swell, it attracted more people. It attracted more resources, attracted more talent, more good ideas. So, you know, we got a little bit of electricity. We were able to pave the roads. We got indoor plumbing. And then we got other centers in other cities. And of course, Swami started writing more books. And more of us began to have a clue as to what was going on. And it just began to swell from the inside. And there was never, besides Swamiji, Swami had a vision, but he never had a plan. Even his statement about how we would eventually get to India was more, when I realized standing here, it was more the fact that because he had been working in India and saw what was possible here at the time that he was separated from SRF and was never able to come back, it was unfinished business. And also he felt a tremendous commission from Master to carry the teachings back here. So, in fact, and I've never thought about this before, I mean, it was like everything else was a means to getting back to India. He wanted to create an international context so that India could be one of many nations and not just, as I was saying, an invasion of Americans. But he never had a plan because he knew if he simply stayed in tune, then everything would unfold in the way it was meant to unfold. And all of us now, of course, because of Swamiji's and Divine Mother's decision that he was done with that body, the initiative for what happens next is in the hands of many others now. He certainly had stepped extremely far back years earlier before his passing from the practical side of what Ananda was doing. But nonetheless, the heart, the beating heart, as long as his heart was beating, was still him. People often would ask me, what did I think would happen after Swami died? This was, of course, before he did. And what I anticipated is really largely what has happened, is that even though Swami was still not at all involved in a day-to-day basis and had turned over to Jyotish, to Devi, and to many others, the bulk of responsibility and decision-making and freedom, nonetheless there was everything still ran through, all threads ran through wherever Swami was. It was interesting, some of you may have heard me say on the various services, that there was always a geographic heart, a geographic center to the planet. And it was just wherever on the globe Swami happened to be sitting. I realized for my whole life it was always the point toward which I leaned. I always knew where he was, and my little tether was always moving around like that. And it was odd to realize that there was no spot anymore. The spot had become infinite. It's been an adjustment. I can't say it's actually exactly been a loss, because I know, as so many of you have experienced, liberated from that body, the consciousness became more free and more present. So it's an odd geographic reality. But when I was thinking about this in advance, because certainly at the age of 86, with the number of health crises he's had, he never unfortunately said he would be like Babaji. No one ever persuaded him to keep his body for this whole age. He never said he would be even like Trilanga Swami, which would have been nice. 300 years, we would have taken that. It was always obvious that it wouldn't be much longer. But I felt that when that geographic heart was removed and the necessity for all wires to run through there would go, that there would be an enormous dispersal of creativity and attunement. And in the same way that Swamiji always felt engaged with the opportunity to try to make everyone on the planet as happy as he was. That was his definition of a happy man. A truly happy man wants everyone else to be as happy as he is. And of course, only saints have that kind of happiness. You know, no banker, no movie actor, no rickshaw driver feels that I am the happiest man in the world and I want everyone to be happy as I am. Only saints have that spirit. But that's a joyful duty. It's so much fun to be happy, and it's really fun to share your happiness with everyone. And that's all that Swamiji did, really, his whole life. He never really made anything else happen. He just tried to think, how can I share my happiness with everyone? And he was funny sometimes. He would say, I know that everyone in the world won't get on the spiritual path, but I pretend that if I just try hard enough, they will. He said, it's a fiction that serves me well. And so he just always had that readiness. I was sharing with some of you when I was here, when he was very first living here, we used to go to the Om bookstore in the Metro Mall. He always liked bookstores and he would look around. We were standing in the spiritual books section. I don't know if he was wearing orange robes or just Western clothes. Somehow I think he was wearing Western clothes. I think sometimes when we'd go out, even then he would. And a man, total stranger, pulls Autobiography of a Yogi off the shelf. Swami's standing very close to him. And just like a child, Swami turns to this total stranger and says, I was his disciple. It was wonderful living with him. And this poor man, he sort of looks like this. And he kind of put this book back and kind of shuffled off. But I just loved it. It was Swami Kriyananda to the max. Somebody's put their hand on Autobiography of a Yogi and he just couldn't contain himself. You know? Isn't that, it's just what a wonderful picture that is. And so accessible. And just makes everything in life fun. I started by saying, here I am, and I can use numbers like 40 years. Oh my gosh, that sounds so long, doesn't it? Like that. And I am not standing in the eternal now. I wish I were. But to a certain extent, we all are standing in the eternal now. You know, it doesn't really matter how long it's been or how long it will be, except for the anguishing monotony of it. But the eternal now and attunement with the Spirit makes that anguishing monotony a lot less. You know, we are gifted with the secret of happiness. We are commissioned with the secret of happiness, and we get to share it. That's all that Master did in his whole life. That's all that Swamiji did in his whole life, and that's all we really have to do in our whole lives. Oh yeah, there's all the rest of that. We still have to earn a living and birth those children and raise them and get them into school and then see them married and then watch their kids. And we get to do all of that too. But that's not really what we're doing. I mean, that's the external circle of the wheel. We're all just in this middle, just sending that out. And it doesn't matter how long the list was. Swami's list was writing these books and giving these lectures. Our list is one mundane task after another. You know, sometimes in America we don't have all the household help that you have here, and I'm shopping and cooking and cleaning and making the beds, and I'm thinking, anguishing monotony, you know? But then I think, what difference does it make? Really, just move into that ray, and Swamiji says, hold it to the spiritual eye, ask Master to help you. It's so simple, he says. So simple, everybody can do it. Why not? to all who received him. He's telling us the truth. It behooves us to listen. So, God bless you.